most essential components that we want to focus on is lost instructional time, not only for students that have been arriving late, and within the presentation today, you'll see how this time compounds over the course of a week and the course of a year, and why it's important for us to really look at this closely. But also looking at our athletic program and some of the challenges that the new schedule has presented for our scholars, and how that has impacted their instructional time as well. I have invited a number of members to engage in this conversation this evening, some of which are athletic directors, but also our head of transportation, to speak to some of the findings based on the current schedule and some of the things that we would like to propose for the board to consider. So I'd like to call Ms. Sandra Fayois to come forward, and Joanna Banzetta. Thank you, ladies, for coming this evening and supporting the conversation. I'm going to turn it over to them at this point.
Good evening, board members. Good evening.
Oh, can you give me one quick second? I'm so sorry.
Of course.
Before we move into the conversation around some of the findings, I think it's important to first speak about the survey results from the community. We had an opportunity to survey our parents as well as our students. And I think it's important to start the conversation prefacing what they have articulated. So can I have Brenda Wilcox-Williams move forward? I guess you can stay there. She can come to the mic. And Ralph, can you switch the presentation, please? So one of the things I heard one of the speakers today talk about the importance of listening to our scholars. And to me, that is very important. So we took it upon ourselves to survey all of our high school students this morning to get a sense from them what they would prefer in terms of start time preferences. And I would like Ms. Brenda Wilcox-Williams to speak to that, as well as the parent survey.
So briefly on the parent survey, we put that out on September 1st, just a few days after the start of school, when we became aware that we had a traffic delay problem that we suspected was beyond just the straight usual start time delays that we typically get every year. So we asked families a couple of different questions to give our team, but also the board, some input as they worked the problem and figured out what our next step would be. Ralph, could you go to the next one? So this basically just shows you the grade levels that went across the board in terms of making sure that we had representation from a wide variety of grade levels. And as you see, we have K through 5, 6 through 8, everybody is represented in this. And it did go out in both English and Spanish as well. So the first question was, given this week's traffic congestion, should NPS consider changes to the school start and end times to relieve the situation? At that point, we did not have any preconceived notions about what the changes would be. So this was just a general question to see whether it is something that we should consider and whether or not parents would consider it as an option for solving some of the problems we were facing at that time. And as you see here, 67% said yes, it's something that we should consider, and 33% said something that it was not something that we should consider. Another key question here was we wanted to understand how much lead time families would need to accommodate any potential changes, whether it's work or childcare, if we were to make such a change, and if it was something that we decided that we need to do. As you see, 68% said they would only need 1 week lead time, and 14% for 2 weeks, and 18%, sorry, other way around. 18% for 2 weeks, and 14% would need 3 weeks. Obviously, they did not know what the suggestion or the solution was at that point. And again, this was just meant to be directional very early on in the first week of school.
And I just want to add, based on Mary Jordan's NFT survey to teachers were, I believe, advocating for 2 to 3 weeks for any potential change to accommodate schedules and needs. Next slide, Ralph.
As the superintendent mentioned, we know that the input from the student voice was going to be important to this discussion, to the board and to the superintendent as well. So this morning we did put together a student survey, again, in both English and Spanish. I went out to every high school and the students were given time in class during the day to fill it out because we wanted to make sure that we had their input for tonight's discussion. Next slide. We had over 3,100 responses, 3,139 responses. That's out of about 4,000 high school students. So it's very representative of our student body. About 47% were Norwalk High School students. 33% were in McMahon, and then we had P-TECH and Center for Global Studies represented at about 10.8% and a little bit less for CGS. So the grade levels in this were even across the grade. So we really do have students here representing every experience that they've had so far. As some of our students mentioned tonight, they've been here when school was in normal times. There were some kids responding here who've known nothing but COVID during high school. So it really is representative of the different experiences that our students have experienced over the past few years. And then here's the results of the survey. So 62% said that they were interested in a 7:30 start time. 37% said that they were interested in keeping it at an 8:30 start time. And again, that's out of 3,139 responses of our high school students across the district. So, and that's our pulse input on our student voice today. So.
I just want to add to that number. One of the things I have been doing is keeping track of the petition that our student, Juliana Solis, has put forward. And as of right now, we have 1,248 participants in favor of the 7:30 start time. So I just want to preface that. I just want to put forward that we are listening to our scholars, that we are taking their input into consideration. As at the same time, we also have some mitigating factors, really looking at the research and what is best for them, but also taking into account that something has to be done this year differently because what we have is not working. And I'm just going to turn it over to Sandra and Joanna to speak to some of what we found.
So thank you, everybody. And we know this has been a long evening, so we're not going to belabor this conversation, but I do want to thank all the students for speaking and hope to add to the informed decision that you guys are going to make. So the options and the information that we offer you is really just information. And so we really want to start with making sure that we understand and underscore the current conditions. So at the start of this academic year was the first time, and this has been said several times, that we actually implemented the new school start times operating at full capacity. And that being that on September of 2019 is when the new school start times were voted on. There were several things that were in the process of getting decided and practiced. And then COVID hit. We never really got to do a full traffic study the way that we would have wanted to. And last year, even though we had the same school start times, we weren't operating at full capacity. We had a hybrid model. We had staggered entry times at the high schools so that we could mitigate overcrowding as a COVID prevention. And so the current conditions are that we do have 59 full capacity buses, 19 small buses on the road. And because of COVID, parents are just choosing to drop off. They're not using the buses at as we expected, especially during the first week of school. There's sort of that joy of bringing your child to school. So there's also citywide construction and other mitigating factors that are making the situation even worse. And so it has resulted in gridlock traffic that has led to countless emails that have been received by the cabinet to let us know that the current situation is unacceptable. Okay. So to recap, I won't spend too much time on this, but to recap, the school start time study, 18 months were spent on the school start time study. And the committee studied several scenarios. And based on parent feedback and fiscal considerations, 2 scenarios were brought before the board. And the new start times were implemented last year. But like I said, because of COVID, we didn't really get to see it in action until now, which is what we're dealing with. So what we know is that we've been tracking the data for each school bus by school. So we actually have it, it's extensive data. And what we know is that during the first week of school, 85% of all buses arrived late when dropping off students at school. We thought that maybe we would see some relief during the second week, and we did, but it's still a really high number of buses in the tier 2 and tier 3 routes, of 75% of them arriving late.
Can I just add one thing? One of the reasons why we experience relief, and I think we heard that in some of the public comments, has been as a result of the added measures that have been put in place.
Thank you.
So it's important to note that we have added additional personnel, especially at the high school levels. We've asked our security guards to come in earlier to allow students in the building. Our administrators, I have to give special kudos for, because they have extended their workday, coming in earlier to open up the sites, to allow students in, to alleviate some of the traffic. So a lot of the relief that you're seeing currently has been as a result of additional personnel that has been added, as well as an extensive support from NPD, providing additional services in traffic control and support. So I just need to note that, because the relief we're feeling is not a product of week 2, but more about the additional mitigating structures that have been put in place, which add additional costs to the district in terms of what it takes to maintain that in place. And it still didn't solve the problem.
We've also worked with Paul Sotnick of DPW. I mean, we really have approached this from a partnership with the city, because we do understand that it's affecting everybody's quality of life. And we have reaped some of those benefits. But like Dr. Estrella said, if you take those things away, we're right back to that 85% that we experienced during the first week. We don't think that would change very much.
Okay, so before you continue, so am I correct in saying then that the added expense, if we continue as is, the added expense is gonna continue, it's gonna get larger, and talking about a tight budget that we have now, those are other mitigating factors that we have to take into consideration also.
Absolutely.
That's correct.
And for clarity, the relief happened for traffic that was directed on site at schools,
Correct.
not traffic en route or at all. Okay.
Correct. And the added component of opening up the buildings early. So the entire cabinet deployed throughout different schools and looked at the problem areas to see what some of the factors associated with some of the challenges we were having, and parameters were put in place to address some of those components. Despite that, we continue to have what I'll call a backlog that creates tier 2 and tier 3 delays in terms of bus cycles.
Alex, I think you have to explain to parents or to all stakeholders that,
Can you speak into the mic? I don't think.
Is it on?
Yeah.
Oh, there it is. So I'm just saying, I think we need to explain, or 2 things. So I think congestion, I know Highland Avenue's better. I hear Strawberry Hill's been better, but obviously still a problem. But I really wanted to address is people need to understand how the bus system works, which I think we're kind of skipping over, that these tiers we're talking about is we have 3 tiers. So there's one, so these buses, we have 59 buses under contract. They do 3 different routes. So if that bus A gets behind on tier 1, obviously then it's going to be late for tier 2, and it's going to be even later for tier 3. And that's why there have been so many of these delays, is it's a domino effect. And once it starts, you can't stop it.
Correct. Thank you.
And that, we can't, 59 buses, I guess you gave me the number today, they're almost $90,000 a bus per year. So, it's not like we can add 20 more buses to solve the problem.
And it's timely to actually leave it on the slide for a little bit, because really, although we're discussing traffic, really this is what the impact of that traffic has been. It has been students arriving late, and on average, because some buses are arriving 5 minutes late, but some are arriving an hour late. So on average, it's about 15 minutes, but I don't want you thinking it's 15 minutes, but this is the average that when we did the Excel, it came up with. It's that, so for 1 week, if you're arriving 15 minutes late every day, you are missing an hour and 15 minutes of instructional time. If you do that over a month, it's 5 hours. And if you do that over an academic year, it's 55 hours. So I think that it's important for us to understand what is really at the heart of what we're discussing, which is the loss of instructional time.
Sandra, but I also understand that there are students that are coming in really late on the buses and not just 15 minutes. We're talking about
Correct.
half hour, so it's, but the
Yeah.
average is 15.
The average is 15 because when you do an average
Right.
on the Excel, one of them might have been 1 minute late, so it skewed the results because your tier one, some of those are arriving on time.
Mhm.
So it skewed that average, but we are having reports of students arriving up to an hour late, especially in those tier 2 and tier 3 schools are the ones that are the most impacted.
And those are students also missing, not just a few minutes, those are big classes, especially if they're in high school. And how about the students, I'm sure you'll probably go over it, the students that are getting home late? Because I'm coming home from work and I'm seeing the buses just dropping off.
Yeah, so for the purposes of this slide, I only did the arrival just so that we know that this is what they're missing when they are, once they arrive at school and they've missed first period or they've missed, morning circle. But the dismissal hasn't been any better.
And coupled to what you are talking about, I think some of the students articulated earlier, the challenge of if a bus in tier 3 is late that is supposed to pick up students for a game, then those students are not going to arrive on time for those games. So that's part of the reason why a lot of our students are being delayed to competitions, because if our tier system is delayed, that the only way that they can go to their games is if our tier system is on time, because the buses cycle back to pick them up to take them to the game. So it's one of the other things that we're carefully looking at, because it's also impacting the game schedule. Besides taking into account, so if you have a child that's an athlete and it's coming in on average 15 minutes late, but in some cases it could be 45, they're missing almost an entire first period. And then on top of that could be missing a fourth period, a part of third as well.
So you actually led right into my
Sorry.
stealing my thunder. All night I've been dealing with this. So the impact on student athletes, and we actually had John Cross and Doug Marchetti, who we asked to join us.
Can you see, Ralph, if you can elevate John Cross and Doug Marchetti? They should be on. There he is.
And while we're waiting for them to be elevated, Dr. Estrella asked our athletic directors to join us to really just provide us some context around the impact that this is having on our athletes, and especially those that are arriving late in the morning, and then in order to meet their athletic requirements are also leaving early to make these away games.
Are they on? John, can you hear us?
Good evening.
Good evening, John. Thank you for joining us this evening. I know you've had a long day.
Life of an athletic director. We're good. Still at school.
Is Doug Marquetti, are you with us?
Yes, I am, Dr. Estrella. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us. Also someone that had a long day. So we appreciate the time you're taking to join us this evening. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. So, John and Doug, I really just was talking about the impact that tardiness is having, in particular to our student athletes, because they are also leaving early for their away games. And I don't know if you could see the presentation, but I have.
Yeah, we can.
Yep.
Hey, Ralph, I'm frozen. Can you advance the slide?
So just to point out, the example that you just showed there was just from Brian McMahon. It said 378 athletes. That did not include Norwalk High, so you can double that number.
Okay.
Almost identical numbers at Norwalk High School in terms of participation for the fall.
John, you provided me these examples. Would you just talk us through what is happening currently with our athletes in terms of the dismissals?
Yeah, sure. So in the examples you have there, basically start times of contests and the travel time, the warm-up time you would need, and then time for the student athletes to get changed. So in this situation, if we had a game in Danbury, the volleyball team, both the varsity and JV, would travel together on a bus, and they would have to be dismissed from class at 2:30. That time schedule there, 45 minutes to Danbury, is cutting it close, but we're trying to keep the kids in class as much as possible. Traffic is kind of bad at times, but that would be at a minimum that our student athletes would have to get out 45 minutes early from class for this contest. The situation gets much worse with the golf team, however, because of the fact that golf matches generally start around 3 p.m. Based off of course availability. And this shows a home golf match, which we would be played at Oak Hills, and our students have to be dismissed an hour and 5 minutes prior to the bell. I crunched some more numbers today, and I took a look at the instructional time loss, and this number really jumped out at me. The golfers, the top golfers, would lose in the first month of school over 1,100 minutes or 18 hours of instruction. And a lot of those kids are AP students. They do well academically. Most of our student athletes do well academically, but they would lose a total of 18 hours. Our cross country team would lose 5.5 hours of instruction. The volleyball team about 5.5 hours, and the other teams are around 3.5 hours of instruction during this season. The other piece too that's also important to consider is that we do have coaches that teach in the building, and they're being dismissed early to go with their team. So for example, our cross country coach, Patrick Bradley, he's going to be dismissed 5 times during the regular season, which would account for about 5.5 hours of instruction that he cannot give to his classmates. I believe Mr. Klein talked about this earlier when he was making some public comments. So we have a lot of issues, not only the student athletes missing out on instructional time, the teachers themselves are not instructing the other the other students who are not being dismissed early as well. So that's a significant impact as well. Doug, if you have anything to say, go ahead, bud.
Sure. Well, I would just echo the fact that, once these buses do leave, traffic in general is crazy, especially if you're heading north on I-95, if we're heading to Fairfield, Trumbull, Bridgeport, and Route 7 can be a crapshoot if you're heading up to Wilton or Ridgefield or Danbury. So, once these buses are leaving, they're still getting stuck in traffic at some point on their travels to our opponent's sites. And, when we get there, we've kind of talked as athletic directors as a group, we'll do the best we can to get the games in. But I think, John, you and I have both been impacted where they've shortened some games already just to get them both in from a schedule standpoint. You start looking at facilities not only in Norwalk, but in other communities. they have youth programs that need to use those facilities. And they'll say, hey, listen, you need to be off the field by 6 o'clock. We need to turn this over to our youth programs. I know John and I have done that kind of work with our community programs here in Norwalk, whether they're at Brian McMahon or Nathan Hale or even Norwalk High School. So, you know, we're in some cases, we're getting these kids out of school early and, you know, they're getting stuck in traffic and it's still a shortened experience for them. So it's got lots of different layers to it. And I know there are no easy answers to it, but it's definitely having an impact very early in the season to this point.
In fact, Doug, the game that I had to shorten yesterday was the McMahon Norwalk freshman soccer game because the game was supposed to start at 4 o'clock and I don't think your team arrived until about 4:20.
The bus didn't, right. The bus left here just right around 3:45, 4 o'clock, somewhere in that range. Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you both for your expertise. I'm actually going to turn it now
Just,
to.
give me
go
one
ahead.
second. Before Doug and John go, does the board have any questions for the athletic directors? I just don't want to hold them up because they've had a long day.
I would just bring up that some of this shouldn't be new. Okay, the bus is being late and kids getting to games late, fine. But, you know, the kids having to early dismiss, we knew this when we made this decision. And if I recall, we did look at Greenwich, you know, because they had to fine tune their schedule and they put, you know, house at the end of the day and they created, I don't know, free periods or they restructured. So it wasn't just like 4 blocks or, you know, that you just ended and all of a sudden, you know, you'd have to miss your last block if you were playing a sport, that they altered the schedule. We were supposed to look into those options. So I'm not sure sports should be that part of this part of the decision because we knew this before we went into this and they were supposed to work it out. Maybe we didn't, I don't know. But, you know, I think some of the issues obviously with transportation and buses and stacking and we can't do 3 tiers in the amount of time we have with the current schedule. I mean, that is something we did not know before, but this stuff we did know before.
I think even in the prior structure, there was some instructional time loss. I think the difference now is the amount of time loss associated that I think is important to make the board aware as they're making a decision. I think that the second fact component, as we shift times, the rest of Fairfield County and other counties that we play against follow a standard schedule. So we have to keep that in mind as well, right? Because as we look into the research and what's best for students, we also have to take into consideration some of the fixed parameters that we have no control over, particularly around the athletic programs and how students are competing with other areas. And what that means for them in terms of travel time, as well as the lack of flexibility in other places around their schedule. So I thought it would be important for the board to have a refresher on this and look at some of the unintended consequences that we have more data on now because we are in the process as we speak that I think are important to point out.
I also want to say that it's also important to keep in mind that a lot of these student athletes, that's their future too. We have to consider that they're looking at scholarships and playing for schools. So if their grades go down because they're missing classes, that can affect their scholarships. That can affect what colleges that they'll apply to or be accepted. So that is a big thing on my end that we need to look at.
And I do think the attention to learning loss following COVID is definitely appropriate to keep that in the forefront of any solutions that we're looking to center our decisions around, because it's just hearing kids who have gone through COVID for 2 years are now getting into a school building for the first time. That's a very different high school experience. And couple it with stressors you're experiencing that are out of your control. I think it's definitely an important thing to keep in the conversation. And it would also present situations where it would make it harder to reference how anyone else did it, because it was it's just a very different time that we're coming on the heels of.
Yeah, and I'd like to add that athletes or student athletes and the importance of athletics to them it is part of their social and emotional improvements and health, being back with their teammates. The work that both athletic directors have done to be sure that the number of student athletes increases every season is really important to kids, right? That we want them to be involved in this. And to Diane's point, not only for the kids who are looking to maybe play in college, but we want to be sure they're keeping their grades up so that they remain eligible to play in the next season in high school. So the idea of exasperated student learning loss and students' social and emotional needs, I think that the spotlight's a little bit different than even when the decision was made, because the idea that it was going to be worked out was something that was told to people while people were saying that may not be feasible. To say that was going to be done without really a plan for it, I think was kind of just good wishes.
And if there are no questions for Doug and John, we can just thank them and say goodnight. And I'm actually going to turn it over to another resident expert, Joanna Zenvetter, that can talk to us about some possible remedies.
Can I just ask you a question for clarification around the bus tracking app? In terms of what we track, do we also track where the buses are actually in traffic? And we're able to discern traffic versus a new bus driver who doesn't know a route?
Good evening. So I will speak to that. The bus tracking app is separate from our GPS system. It does work in cooperation with it, but that's how the system is.
John, can you speak closer to the mic?
Oh, I'm
People in the
sorry.
back can.
The tracking app is actually run through the GPS system. But it is a separate app just for parents to be able to find their buses. We did have a similar tracking app when we were with our previous vendor. This is Durham's, our current vendor's proprietary app. And that is rolling out tomorrow. And it does track for families, but the GPS system, the Zonar system that the bus company uses, does track where the buses are at any time, and gives us feedback on when the bus is stopping, and it records the bus stops at a bus stop. It has to open the door for it to record the time, and then we can go back and track that.
Do we know how much of any of this is contributed to just learning new routes?
We have the same veteran drivers. We've had the same team of drivers, some for over 20 years. We have maybe 4 or 5 new drivers this year. We are still in a driver shortage, which is a nationwide issue due to COVID. And so we do have we have 2 or 3 people who are actually here from out of town who are helping to fill in so that every route is covered.
Joanna, can I ask a question? It's Heidi. How are you? Couple things. You were, intimately involved in all of this when all of this was being worked out with the buses and the schedules, and kind of fast forward now to 2021. There is a bus shortage, which we know, bus driver shortage, correct? And maybe this is also a question for Dr. Estrella for Human Resources. What kind of outreach also are we doing to kind of hire and try to bring forth some bus drivers here, because there is a shortage? Question 1. And question 2, are our buses at full capacity? I believe some are, some aren't. What are we doing to alleviate that, where we have a full load of students on a bus, and then at another time we have only a few students? So or is there anything that we're doing to look at that? And also, I know that we're looking at routes and safety and best ways to get to our students, but when we've spoken to our bus drivers, what has been their input and their advice and their suggestions as far as the routes over the past 2 weeks? We're now starting week 3. We're in day 2 of week 3, but what's happened in week 1 and week 2?
So I'll address some points, Heidi, and I'll
Yeah.
turn it over
Sure.
to Joanne. In terms of the shortages, yeah, although not nationwide, there have been shortages. We've been very fortunate in Norwalk to be able to have a cohort of drivers to fulfill the needs of the district, like Joanne articulated earlier. So unlike some districts where some drivers have to run double shifts because of the fact that they don't have enough drivers. We don't have that challenge in Norwalk. In terms of the capacity of our buses and how full or not they are, that's something that we are going to be tracking in the next few days. We wanted to allow just to get the system started, and especially to reintegrate the new technology that this new company is putting in place. And I'll turn over to Joanne to speak to the pieces around routes and the feedback from drivers, because I know she's been intimately engaged in conversations with them.
And I believe, Heidi, you have the other question regarding what steps are we taking to hire new
Right,
drivers?
got it.
So the bus company is offering a sign-on bonus incentive to drivers who are fully licensed of $2,000. And anyone who is already working for the bus company, who's a current employee, who refers anyone, is also being offered a $2,000 sign-on bonus for that person. We have also been working with the local agencies, Family and Children Agency, Carver Center, and also the Norwalk Housing Authority. So we have sent out the flyer and worked with those agencies to try to promote for new hires. They've also run hiring events in local shopping plazas, and they are currently working on, or have been working on, an online promotion for new hires.
Okay. Thank
So
you.
they're
Yeah,
diligently working
go
on
ahead.
it. Yeah.
okay, I appreciate that. I have many more questions, but I'll let you continue through the presentation. I can ask more at the end. Thank you.
Okay, so over the past 2 weeks, we've been looking at what the possible remedies are. So we've looked at standardized start times at all schools, where elementaries would be on one tier, middle schools would be on another, and high schools would be on their own. We've also looked at the increased deadhead time in between the routes, which would allow time to navigate traffic concerns, handle unexpected delays, and stay on schedule. And then the third option would be consolidating routes to maintain route efficiencies. That's not always a people pleaser. That would be something where we would need to start looking at consolidating bus stops so that the routes are shorter, so we're able to maximize pickup in central locations for the neighborhood and be able to keep the bus on time. So we've been tasked with, following the science and honoring the work that the school start time committee put forth in the 2018-19 school year. So here is what we've looked at. So correcting the issues by changing the route times and bell times. So this slide will show you the 19-20 school year, the 2021-22 school year current, and then the two options that we are recommending. These two options, just so that you all know, have been scheduled. We've looked at, I've actually gone and done the work. We've actually, for option 2, run dry runs. Between Tuesday and Saturday of last week, the drivers were out with those new schedules to be able to vet the work that's been done. Unfortunately, when we worked on the early start time, we didn't have that opportunity because of COVID. The decision was made in September 2019. We started working on scheduling. We did run dry runs, but we didn't really have that opportunity to vet that service. So here we've been able to actually say that drivers have have gone out, done the runs, and know that the times would work. So both options allow for a substantial gap between the arrival and dismissal times in the problem areas of Highland Avenue and Strawberry Hill Avenue, allowing for relief to the congested areas and as well as this campus, Jefferson and Ponus, which currently has a 15-minute difference between arrival and dismissal time. Option 1 will require a ride share between Silvermine and All Saints, the parochial school. Option 2 does not require that ride share. Option 2 allows for the elementary schools to operate into 2 bell times, where currently the bell time structure for elementary schools operates in 3 bell times. Option 1 will require some of our younger students to wait at bus stops prior to 7 a.m. due to longer bus schedules. Option 2 allows the elementary schools with shorter bus schedules to operate in the earlier elementary tier, which would shorten the wait time at bus stops, allowing students to arrive at stops after 7 a.m. Option 2 also allows us to plan ahead and accommodate the transportation needs of the lower Ponus steam magnet, which will likely require up to 10 additional buses when we begin to implement.
So, yeah. So one of the things that we need to take into consideration as we move forward and plan the work, we have a planning year this year to map out Ponus Elementary that will launch September of 22. We need to take into consideration the bus implication of that and what that would mean. We also have been in conversation about Wolf Pit potentially becoming a magnet art school. And those factors have also, we also need to take into consideration in terms of looking at the bus schedule as well. The other thing that Joanne worked on was also tiering the start times of the different schools that were in, like, let's say Strawberry Hill, where we have 3 different schools, tiering the time far enough to avoid multiple schools coming in close proximity at the same time, which is part of the reason why we have some of the delays and congestion problems currently. So I don't know if you want to further elaborate on that.
Sure. So with option 2, we see a 45-minute window between the arrival at the elementary school and the arrival at the high school. And then in the third tier, it would have a half an hour window of time in between the high school and the middle school. And that would service both sides of town. So we would be alleviating that traffic on Highland Avenue as well as on Strawberry Hill. And it would also alleviate the traffic within this campus. So we would be answering the issues to congestion, and that would be able to get parents and buses in and out of the buildings and the campuses on time.
I just want the community to also know that we have been in communication with the city. Mayor Reeling has been extremely supportive in allowing his team to work with us and looking at the construction sites that are currently in place, some of which the city has control over, others that they do not because they're state-run projects. But where feasible, we are also looking at how to mitigate some of those challenges by potentially working with the city and delaying the time where some of these projects begin in the morning and giving us some leeway there. But despite that, we still have to make significant modifications to the schedule in order for it to work.
In terms of issues at the parochial schools and charter schools, since we're responsible for providing transportation, is there anything lingering that we have to be mindful of solving that isn't reflected in any of these scenarios? Like, I don't know how they are impacted, and I don't know how big or how much of an issue it is to solve.
So in thinking, and always being mindful of our partners and knowing that we are mandated to provide that transportation, the Columbus and side-by-side timeframe will not change, so they will not be affected. the parochial school in option 1 would need to ride share with Silvermine. And the reason why we looked at that option is because of the dual language program. We are transporting students from all over town as we are with the parochial. So it was easy when we looked back and saw that there was a lot of stops similar at each building, and we were able to consolidate those routes. There would be a travel time of maybe 8 minutes between one building to the next, and that was taken into consideration also. But in option 2, we wouldn't have to do that ride share.
For this year.
Right.
But and one of the things that we're considering as we think about the work moving forward, we will consider that for 22-23 as we need to consolidate and really process the addition of Ponus Elementary and the additional buses that that's going to require to ensure that we don't engage in a situation where there's added costs in terms of transportation, because we are adding now a new program into the district.
So this next slide just gives you an overview of what we've previously had, current and proposed times. So possible next steps. Based on tonight's discussion, we do have arranged with the bus company to run option 2 for a 3rd time on Thursday during the Jewish holiday. Or any of the options, but the option 2 has been run twice already. So it would be an opportunity for the drivers to actually go out in the time frame that they would be transporting and have actual traffic data. We would communicate new start times to families, allow families time to adjust plans to accommodate the new times. Of course, post the new routes and orient families to possible new stops or bus numbers or pickup times, and work with the After the Bell program to provide additional before and after school care as needed.
Joanna, can I just interrupt? I'm sorry for just one quick second. To do the new route a 3rd time, option 2, is that correct? Is that what you were just discussing?
Correct.
Okay. The only question I have on that, Thursday is a holiday, Yom Kippur. So I'm wondering, how will traffic be on that particular day, right? They might do the route, but I would assume there might be less traffic because more people might have the day off. So, I'm just trying to understand the reasoning. I understand because it's a day off, but it would be on Thursday, which is a holiday.
So the first day that they actually ran the routes was Tuesday, the day after Labor Day. Yeah. And the traffic pattern was very low. So they ran through from Tuesday to Saturday, all of the routes, right, all of the proposed bus routes. And so we felt that Thursday, being a day off and being in the middle of the week, that it would be best for them to run it at the actual start times, where we would have more data.
Okay.
And obviously it's not an ideal situation.
Yeah. I mean, that I'm thinking just because of the holiday and, when else can you do it? But I think it's, lack of a better word, might be a little skewed because it's a day off, right? For many people, not all, but for many.
It is skewed in that perspective. One of the things we talked about asking the drivers to pause at least for 5 minutes at every stop. And it's more about determining whether on an ideal situation, how efficient is this route. And if we notice in an ideal situation that there are challenges, and obviously it will not work in conditions that are not favorable. So it would give us some data points. I think that in order for us to further develop this, we also might want to consider a traffic study. I believe in reviewing the previous work done by the task force that a traffic study was not conducted. And I think for us to gather more data that will really inform some of the hot spots and challenges that we might face, that is something that we might want to consider as well. And, given the feedback from the community and hearing some of the feedback today and throughout the week, one of the things that we might want to consider is for this year, reverting back to the previous bell time, allowing us an opportunity to re-engage and expand the task force work to further study the healthy start time option and make sure that one, first and foremost, that our students are arriving to school on time, two, that we do this in a later time that it will allow us to further look at additional factors that are important. And also it would give us an opportunity, given some of the COVID challenges that we've had, to initiate this at a time where we will have acclimated more, and hopefully at that point, the pandemic will be at its termination. So initially, we were coming forward and presenting option 2 as a choice. I think, given what we've learned from the community and especially our scholars, I think that it's prudent for, at least in my perspective, to recommend to the board potentially moving back to our original start time, with the caveat that we will spend this year further studying the healthy start time and looking for ways in which we can effectively engage in the work, honoring the research, but most importantly, also taking into account what our community wants. And that concludes our presentation. At this point, we open it to the board for additional deliberation and questions.
Thank you so much to Dr. Estrella and to the senior team for walking us through some of the background, the current context, and some of the possible remedies. I do look forward to a rich discussion from board members. We heard a lot from community members, families, students, and other stakeholders tonight, and I think it's definitely our time to engage in that conversation. So I'm going to open it up to my colleagues.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes.
I can start, Colin, if you want, or you can start with everybody that's present. It doesn't matter.
I do want you to start, Heidi. Go ahead.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Lots of information to digest for sure. And just a couple of things. I'll try to be brief. I have to say the comments, especially from our scholars, our students, were very thoughtful, really well laid out, and very compelling, their comments. And it really resonated with me, and having them speak, as well as many of the parents that came tonight. Thank you, and virtually, and we appreciate that coming forth, especially our students, because very brave to come over and come out tonight and give their feedback and their thoughts and what they feel is working and what really is not working. More importantly, what is not working at this point. Looking at the scenarios that were presented tonight, really wasn't thrilled with any of them, to be quite honest. And I thought, well, maybe we've got to go back and digest this and think of what's going to work for all of our students, which is our elementary, middle, as well as our high school students. So that really brought to light when the presentation, and again, the compelling statements from our students and our parents. So I'm wondering at some point we go back and we really figure out what we need to do. We're going almost halfway. Tomorrow will be halfway into week 3. So hopefully by the end of the week, we might have more information. But I agree, it's not sustainable. It's absolutely not sustainable what's happening now. So I think we've got to figure out what our next steps will be. And also I wanted to bring up the survey. The student survey, I think it was 62% of our high school students. These are kids that are living and breathing what they're doing every day, would like to go back to the 7:30 time. And I think it was 37 or 38% would prefer the 8:30 time, which is the current time that we have. And you also look at COVID and how last year most of our students were remote, and it just is very different as far as traffic. Many were home versus going to school and driving or taking the bus. So we have to look at that in a different lens now. So I think there's just a lot of different variables, and I think we have to continue to look at this and really figure out as a board and as a community what's going to work best for all of our students. So again, I feel like we need to go back and look at that. Another interesting point was also the signatures. I wrote down some notes, but I think it was about 1,000 or 1,200 that were in favor of going back. So I don't know, Dr. Estrella and the board, what's the right solution at this time? Do we think of maybe instead of an 8:30 time for high school students, maybe it's an 8 o'clock, maybe it's a half hour. I know that there are other districts that have done the half hour versus the hour. So, I do believe we have to look at this a little bit more closely and come up with the right fit for everyone. And I know it's a hard, it's a lot of factors that are involved in the busing and money and schedules and tiers, bus tiers. But I think we have to look at this a lot more closely tonight. And it was an eye opener for me to hear all the comments tonight. And that's why we had, and I'm thankful, Dr. Estrella, that you had this special meeting tonight, because I think it was needed. And I think we need to be as transparent and as open as possible. And if we need to tweak and we need to make some changes, then that's probably what we need to do.
So thank you, Heidi. I just want you to know that we're looking at an 8 o'clock start time. It's, a lot of people are like, tweak 15 minutes here, 30 minutes here. It's such a complex puzzle. And I think Johanna can speak to the number of hours that we've invested. Today, we had our principals conference, and I actually luckily have an amazing team that took over. And Joanna, Sandra, and I locked ourselves in a room and continued to deliberate with the consultant and looking at alternative options. We looked at an 8 o'clock start time. It created close to $500,000 additional cost in doing that. So there's a lot more tweaking and reconsideration. We had extensive conversations today with members of the Greenwich community and looking at some of their challenges. One of the things that is important to know is that they spend an additional $1.3 million in order to get to the point that they are, and they're still facing some challenges. Particularly, they fixed the start time challenge. They now have a dismissal time challenge. So it's a very complex process that I don't think we're going to resolve within a few days. And that's why I think we really need the course of the year for us to bring the right constituents forward, to have additional conversations. I think Suzanne, as a member of the board, who was a principal in the district under the prior start time, can provide a lot of insight to the board as well as to myself in terms of what her experiences were. I'm sorry that I'm putting you out there, Suzanne, but I think you bring a lot of history that I think is valuable and important. So I think we owe it to the community to give this a year and maybe revert back to the previous start time. I think that the research and what it speaks to is important, but I want to make sure that we take the valuable learning and lessons that the previous task force put forward and build upon that so that we can get to the right place.
Thank you. I just want to end with this. I think the science, the data backed up the reasoning behind this, but fast forward, COVID, changes that have happened, kids being remote versus being in person now, the busing, we have to look at all those variables. And I think sometimes everything's not black and white. Sometimes there's gray, and I think we have to look at it that way. But the science and the data backed up the reasoning behind it. But again, we have to look at it again through a different lens and what we need to do that's going to work really for all levels, for elementary, middle, and high school students.
Great. Thank you for kicking us off. Heidi, Sarah, your hand is up.
For sure. So what I wanted to say was, I think that what I really like that I'm hearing in this conversation is a willingness to look to data to make choices. And I'm really glad that we surveyed our families, and I'm glad that the students got surveyed today. And I think that as part of whatever process of decision making and getting more data that we come into, that really getting traffic data per site, quantifiable traffic data per site, be part of that, like a a really detailed traffic study, because I think we heard from a lot of people speaking tonight, and we got a lot of emails today, and all of those stories are very moving, and they're people's personal stories. They're their personal narratives, but they are all also anecdotal. So I think it's really important to honor people's experiences and do our best to make changes that benefit the most amount of people, but also to use as much data as we can to make those decisions. So that's my contribution.
Thank you, Sarah. I see Suzanne. I'm just going to see if there's anybody in the room. Wanted to interject? Okay, Suzanne, go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to support the idea of going back, because something needs to be fixed and fixed soon. Because as kids are losing time, they lose more and more time. It's harder and harder to catch up that time. I like the thought of going back to the earlier start times. We also heard that the majority of the workers and their unions like that time, the parents that spoke, the kids that spoke. And I think the difference is what Dr. Estrella talked about, is to ask the right question versus saying we're changing start times. How do we make this work? The question should be, if we're thinking about changing start times, how could that work? So the idea of doing a traffic study prior to making any decisions about start times would be new and different. And I think we've learned a better way to do it. In addition, if we're looking at quality of life and issues, it has to be looked at everywhere, right? We heard from parents that we may be sacrificing young people's sleep schedules to help out older students' sleep schedules. So I think that's something that a new group would need to consider. And I think it's going to take some time answering the right questions. Having talked to high school kids about this prior to the change, the majority of them, they liked the idea of coming in later until they heard that meant they had to stay at school later. Then they all thought it was a really bad idea. Teams starting, it isn't just the games, but teams that then start their regular practices later, get home later to start doing homework. We heard from workers, kids that work, got to work later. So a lot of the advantages to sleeping a little bit later in the morning was more than negated by the stress that they were put under by going to bed late because of the work that they needed to do. And I do think that COVID has added a whole new dimension to the stress that young people are feeling and getting back involved in school. So I like Dr. Estrella's comment to switch back and do a really a 360 job, not saying we have to make this happen. How are we going to back into this solution? But in fact, what is the best solution for all kids, pre-K through 12, and start times with some of the data that the board may not have had when they made that original change.
Thank you, Suzanne.
I have to agree with Heidi and Suzanne, with reverting back to regular start time the way it was. Sometimes we can't reinvent the wheel, right? And sometimes we need more information, and we need to listen to the right people, and we need the experts to tell us how things work. We've listened to students, we've listened to families, we've listened to the unions, staff, and everything. But we're in the middle of a pandemic. Things have changed. It may have worked back then. It's not working now. We also have to consider the number of buses. We have to consider finances. We have to consider the city. There is so much to look into. It's not an easy conversation. It's not an easy decision. So I'm glad that we're not voting on anything tonight, because there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot to look at. There's a lot to review. So you're right, it's going to be very difficult for some families, but we have to look at the bigger picture. And for me right now, the bigger picture is going back to regular start time, letting the high schools be at 7:30, having these athletes and children that need to work to help support the families the athletes that need to do their homework and not be up until 2 o'clock in the morning. It's huge. And then going back to the drawing board with the finance department and looking at the finances, because if we're going to add more buses at $80,000 a bus, that's a lot. That's a lot to.
I'm gonna count.
86, okay. So I'm just saying that those are all things we have to sit down as a board and look at. It's not just, traffic on the street. It affects a lot of things and a lot of detail.
And just to be clear, Diana, we may take a vote tonight if somebody wants to make a motion. I think if we wanted to revert to 7:30 high school times, we would need to vote on that.
Yes, but it's not a permanent, depending on what we're doing.
No vote is permanent. We voted on this.
Colin, if I could just interject, I'm sorry,
I
quickly.
just-
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Colin, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to bring
Yeah.
Mike in, and I'll come back to you,
Yeah,
Heidi.
that's fine. Sure, Mike, go ahead.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you. So, I mean, this has been definitely an adventure. And the whole way this started, I mean, that's all water under the bridge, so I don't think we need to go through it. But, we did have, whatever it was, over 120 public comments, or sorry, 120, over 120 emails, 25 plus public comments. I know I personally got over 30 phone calls and I lost track of how many text messages about this. But from the minute I realized where we were and what the facts, that this isn't a traffic issue, but it's a bus operational issue, logistical issue that we can't just hope will get better. It's just the bus routes as designed at the end of the day are not working as planned. And so we have to do something. And my plan, and I plan to do it at the appropriate moment, was to introduce a motion to return to 7:30, because that's kind of the cleanest, simplest. I've never heard of a school system that changes their start times in the middle of the school year. So this will be a first, but it's something we have to do. And we might as well pull the Band-Aid and do it sooner rather than later. I don't think there's any data we're going to get that would change our minds so dramatically after everything we've heard, at all what we've learned, what we've heard is feedback from all stakeholders. And I think at this point, we should return to 7:30, and then we can work, over the course of this school year, at what we might want to do next year. Obviously, it's going to be a lot more difficult to implement 8:30 after everything we've learned, but we should have a proper vetted decision, which we did not have before. We did not have student input. They came and spoke at a board meeting, but the decision had already been made. And the hearings were window dressing. So I think if we're going to do it, we've now gotten a lot of feedback. We've learned a lot. And maybe we can't do this until more of our neighbors do it. We know New Canaan, Greenwich did it. They've had their problems. New Canaan, the public forced it on the superintendent. He fought it, but after 2 years gave in. And we know Wilton did it, but they have a different layout. And that was 15 years ago or 10 years ago. But until we have a majority of our athletic conference on board, it's probably not realistic to try to do it. And especially with so many of our students needing to work. If many of you remember some of the public comments we did get before were students who were supporting themselves in high school, living on their own for various reasons and needed jobs. And those comments really have stuck with me all along here. So I would like to introduce a motion at the appropriate time to make the decision tonight and to revert to 7:30. The superintendent can choose how much of a window we need before that gets implemented. And maybe the idea of ending it after the marking period, making that change makes more sense. That's an operational decision, but I would like to introduce such a motion.
One more thing. Sorry, one more thing. I also think that going back to the original will make less changes for families. Most of the families are already used to that old way. So we're not giving them a third option to try to rearrange their schedule. It's basically going back to what they were used to. They moved forward, it didn't work, we're going back. So less changes, less new things for families. That's the way I'm looking at it too.
And certainly changes for high school students are easier to implement than younger kids. I'm gonna get Heidi and then Godfrey.
You know, I am in full support of reverting back to the high schools back to 7:30 start time. But I also feel it would be helpful to view the decision the same method we were looking at these options tonight. Just in the sense of being mindful of what history has taught us and the opportunity we can to make an informed decision with all stakeholders involved. Let's take advantage of it. And I don't know if there will be any peripheral factors that should be considered, but in the sense of the support that's been demonstrated around reverting back, I do think whatever time is allocated to it, it should be planful to anticipate as much as possible what the challenges will be from this change back. Because in any situation, there are pretty much domino effect of impacts that happen in any type of decision. I'm more visual. I don't know if there are any elementary schools that may be impacted, but I just thought it'd be worth pointing that out. And also just a discussion that has to be addressed around the logistical piece around the buses. You know, they're looking at the data presented tonight. There's still kids getting picked up and dropped off late outside of high school, which is the other layer of the issue. And I don't know how much this addresses it or if it just allows more of a compartmentalized conversation about looking at the bus logistical issue. But that's the other thing that's still in the forefront of my mind, that piece of it.
Thank you, Godfrey. Heidi, you wanted to interject?
Yes. You know, I'm also hopeful at some point, Alex, I know you mentioned if the high schools have an 8 o'clock start time, did you say $500,000? I can't recall how much you said that would cost.
Well, right now, hold on.
Yeah, it's fine. You know, it's fine.
I'll tell you the numbers that we have preliminary.
I think I wrote down 500,000, but I might have.
Yeah, it's about $500,000, but I want to tell you exactly how many buses. Sandra, you send me the scenario.
Do you want to continue while she looks that up?
Yeah, that's fine. As you're looking at that, I was just curious what the cost would be and how down the road we could possibly look at that scenario. I know that there are other districts that have that half hour time, later start time versus an hour. They have that half-hour start time.
So it's eight buses at 86,000 a piece.
Okay. And if the change does happen tonight, I was hoping we'd have more data, but I assume we'd have as much as we're going to get at this point, that we would give as much notice as we could. I know Mary Jordan had spoke and Joe Giandirco had spoke about some of the staff and, you know, families that have already made this change. So I'm also just a bit concerned about the ones that we've already made this change and they have plans already with work or childcare, just so we can have some notice for them. To make it fair for the families, because I know that could potentially be a hardship as well, as Godfrey had mentioned before. So those are just some of the thoughts that I had in closing.
Thank you, Heidi. Others? I want to jump in here to first of all, just to really appreciate the richness of this discussion. You know, it's a long meeting, but I think it's very important for us to have this input from so many different stakeholders in the community. Clearly, it's giving us a lot to think about. You know, I keep thinking about that phrase, follow the science, and the amount of research that has gone into thinking about healthy start times for older learners, not just here in Norwalk, but across the country. And then, of course, the very real issue of gridlock that we're seeing across town. And I'm thinking, okay, this is something that we're seeing in districts throughout Connecticut, New England, throughout the country. This is kind of a nationwide issue that is caused in part by more parents doing drop-off. As some folks mentioned tonight, this kind of started the term chaos is not so atypical. And I don't know that we could solve the traffic issue by going with either of the options presented tonight, just because I think there's so many factors that are involved. I don't want to make a decision tonight that then just shifts the gridlock either earlier or later in different parts of town. And I also want to, just say that we knew when this was initially approved that this was going to be a big change that would take time for people to adjust to. And as Heidi has said, we're in the third week of school, so I don't know it's fair to say that this is working or not just yet. That said, one of the things we keep hearing tonight is that because of COVID, for example, parents are still are more likely to drop their kids off. Because of COVID, we're having some issues, even though we don't have empty buses, we're still having issues with some of the bus routes. And I think about the implementation of this healthy start time, which was really delayed in earnest from last year because of COVID. And as much as everyone here would like it to be otherwise, we have to admit that it's still COVID. And I think that there has been very general push to kind of will that away, but we can't pretend that what we're doing, any of this is normal. And I think that using science that is meant to improve students' lives, but that ends up costing them instruction time, is exactly the opposite of what we're going to do. We know that making a big shift in start times at this time of the school year, as Mike said, is going to have a sizable impact on every single family. And I think we have, as Dr. Estrella said, we have tried some early mitigation factors in terms of traffic control and having earlier drop-off times. And we're still about 75% late on our buses. And I think that we all agree that that's just not sustainable. I do think that my thinking is that not much has changed. Much has changed, but not enough has changed from last year to this year for us to try to do this in a way that makes sense. If I were to make the motion, although I'll let anybody else do it, I would say we should make a motion to delay the implementation of Healthy Start until it makes sense to do so. I mean, some of the things that were mentioned tonight include doing a fuller traffic study, which I don't think we had the opportunity to do before this current implementation. And I think a fuller look at the full cost impact of the Healthy Start times, which I don't think we have in front of us. And so it would not be saying, let's not follow the science, but I think it would be saying, let's actually follow the science and realize that we're still in the middle of a global pandemic and are not equipped at this time to implement the new high school start times the way we should. If that were the motion on the floor tonight, I think that I don't think we would have. I think we would have to seriously consider it, not just based on the overwhelming feedback tonight. And I want to really thank and really appreciate everybody who was able to contribute, while also acknowledging, as one of the parents said, that sometimes we're more motivated to speak up when we want change. And there may be many people who are able to cope with this new paradigm in a way that did not prompt them to speak up tonight. And I do want to acknowledge, in the survey data that we got, we have about 40% of people who are fine. I want to acknowledge them in this as well, as part of a larger entreaty to all of us. When we feel these incredible passions about whatever the issue at hand is to always, kind of treat anybody with an opposing view with the same humanity that we wanted to treat us with, right? So all of that said, I think that we have a choice tonight if we want to take action. I think the floor is open for anybody to make a motion. Mike.
I would like to make a motion that we alter our schedule from what it is currently to our historic schedule with a 7:30 a.m. high school start times and the related start times that worked for elementary and for middle schools. I know they were looking at different provisions for K-8, right? This year would just be Columbus, so I think they've got that under control. And I would also say, that the board would like the administration to further research the possibilities for a later high school start time, but that those options would need to be vetted by the public, unlike the last round.
Thank you, Mike. Motion's on the floor.
My clarification.
Yes.
In terms of what worked for the elementary schools. In terms of what worked for the elementary schools within your motion, does that include a Fox Run change? Because I just recall parents saying they went to 3 different start times.
Yeah, I mean, if you look.
Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Well, I was just gonna say, so I'm not sure why there were all those changes at Fox Run. I mean, they did, in 17, they started at 8:30, and 18, they started at 8. And now they're on at 9:15 or they were 9:15 in 2020. So
I just want to make sure.
I don't know. There must have been reasons for all that the board never were involved in that. So I guess we would leave that once again operationally to the superintendent, that we shouldn't be setting a time for a specific school, but there must have been specific reasons, maybe because the Family Resource Center is there. I don't know. Okay, so we'll defer, my motion would defer to the superintendent to choose the optimal time for the start of that school.
And Mike, if I may, if there's room to amend your motion, looking at the start times from before, the before times, going back to what it was, would change Fox Run from 9:15 currently back to 8:15, which I think would be a big change for the people in that school. It would also change Kendall from 8 o'clock currently to 8:50, almost an hour. And, I think I agree with what you're saying about making sure that we really do the full due diligence that I don't think was able to happen. We also want to mitigate the change for as many families as possible. So perhaps an amendment to the motion might be that we just change the high schools back to 7:30.
We can't do that. It's not that simple. I'm sorry to interject. It's not that simple, unfortunately.
Because of the cost.
It's a puzzle, right? Because it's a tiering, it's a grouping. It's not that simple that we could just shift one. If we shift one, it has a ripple effect on everything else. And it's not that simply done. That means that we would have to create a completely new route and test out a completely new route. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, I appreciate that. I wonder if, to Mike's point, if we can, in thinking of delaying the implementation of the new start times, try to mitigate the change for the families at Kendall and Fox Run, because under Mike's motion, those 2 schools would change almost an hour. And that's a big change.
Have we heard from those parents at all? If that, what works best for them? The overall factor to me tonight, when we talk about the stakeholders, for me, were the parents and the kids. So maybe we need to find out from Fox Run what time works best for them, and then try to figure that out into the new route.
I think we have to figure out, like, first in terms of the routes, what is possible, because it's not just simply asking them what time.
I understand that.
It has to fit in the puzzle.
So when you do the puzzle, then you can give them some options.
Colin?
If that's possible based on the number of buses they have in the route.
And actually, Fox Run should be there must be a reason why those times shifted so much. Those should be pretty easy because Fox Run's a short run bus, their catchment area is quite small. So those bus routes are really, it's quite short. I think Kendall's bus route might be a little longer, but is Joanna still? No?
Colin?
Anne to come because she's the expert and maybe she can answer some of these questions better than I can.
Just 1 second, Sarah.
Yeah, give us a second. So what do you think is the feasibility based on your experience with this, with the old bell time and potentially making some modifications for Kendall and Fox Run to avoid creating a drastic shift in their current time?
So we can look at it. It will take time. I can tell you that the 1920 bell times had a 95% on-time performance. Just so that you have that information.
If you look at the route and where these schools are situated, it alleviates a lot of the traffic challenges because of their distance in between start times. If you look at Ponus, which is in that same proximity of as Kendall, Ponus on the old time is at 8:15. Kendall is at 8:50, allowing approximately 35-minute grace period between start time. And that in itself alleviates traffic significantly.
Just
So-
But Kendall is currently at
Sorry.
8.
Just
I mean, in
Kendall,
1920 start.
right, but Kendall is currently at 8. If we change it to 8:50, we're asking those families to make an hour change.
May I?
And, you know, I just want to put that on the record.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sarah.
I was just going to say that it's 11:15 at night and we have a meeting in a week. This was a special meeting. So I think that given all of the math that we're all trying to do in the moment now, it might make sense to take that time because it doesn't seem like we're ready to make a decision.
I would say, and I appreciate that, Sarah, you know, if it's possible, Joanne, you know, and I don't know what's possible, we have to work within reality to go back to a paradigm, back the high school's at 7:30 and revert back to the old start times for all the schools. But just keep in mind Kendall and Fox Run and just, you know, how much or how little we can make this affect them, you know, because I think every other school would be fine. But if you're asking just two schools, I mean, you know, the high schools seem to be in favor. But you're asking two elementary schools to make an hour shift. We're kind of, you know, running into some of the issues that were brought up tonight. You know, I just want to make.
And also, let's just ask the community first what they like, if that time would work for them, right? Because it might turn out that they are okay with that time. And we can look at what we could potentially do to mitigate some of that.
I would be in favor.
Before the end of this week, we can definitely take a look at that. But if a decision is going to be made, we need to make it soon so that we allow enough time. If you were to pass a vote today, that would we would try to potentially have a start date of October 4th, which is right when a day before the new semester starts. It kind of allows the high school students in particular to start a fresh semester with their new time schedule. And it also gives parents as well as teachers more than enough time to make any modifications given the outcomes of the survey. The initial survey we had said approximately a week was the predominant. For teachers, approximately 2 to 3 weeks. So that gives us 2.5 weeks. Families 2.5 weeks to make accommodations. If we delay it further, it delays the time and the amount of instructional loss over time. And parents are left in a situation where they know there might be a change, but there's no decision yet. You see what I'm saying?
I did, but I mean, could we still do the October 4th implementation if we voted on this on the 20th? That would give them about 2 weeks.
I'd like to have my motion. I'd like to vote on it tonight because I agree with the superintendent.
I have to
Families need
agree.
to know and plan. We can't leave this.
I have to agree, we
uncertainty.
have to do it tonight only because, first of all, the experts, like I said before, know better than we do. The timing of everything, she just said it was a 94%. You know, they were being there on time. We have to take in consideration all the staff. It's not, you know, there's a lot of schools and that's a lot of staff. And we have to
No,
give them enough time.
We'll certainly take the vote tonight. I'm saying, I wonder if 1 week, is what I'm asking, will allow us to hear from Kendall and Fox Run families, you know, who have
That
opinions.
decision at the end of the day, since we don't have like extra money sitting around, my guess is, Joanna, right? It's gonna be driven by the bus schedule more than what monies we have. And, you know, they might say, we want this or we want that. We might not be able to provide that. I think it's gonna be more the logistical side. But we have 12,000 kids in our school district. You know, between Kendall and Fox Run, we probably have 800 kids. So I mean, we're not even talking about 10%. Not that I'm trying to demean them or anything like that. I'm just saying the rest of our students need to be able to make a plan. And so
I'm glad you're not trying to demean them, because I wonder if having a week to hear from them and still giving a 2-week implementation period might be worth it for those 800 students who are just as important as all the others.
Could I just add something?
Can you speak into the mic?
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I just wanted to add something because I have a little history in regards to Kendall and Fox Run and the time changes. So we implemented, we added a half an hour to the elementary schools within a 2-year phase in.
Oh, that's right.
So we, in 2017, 18, 18, 19, right. So we did the first 6 elementaries in 17, 18, and the second in 18, 19. Brookside, Tracy, and Kendall were a little offset because when we added the time, we front loaded the time instead of splitting it and having it 15 minutes in the morning and 15 minutes in the afternoon. When we started to do the early start time or the later start time, Kendall at that time was going to be an all-day building. They were going to be an academy and they were going to run from 8 to 4. At that time, we were figuring into the schedules that option. If we were going to continue down that pathway, we would have needed to shift another building to make that work, which was Fox Run. Now, the Fox Run community was not happy at that time with that change, and they were vocal. So if we're going to ask the communities, we might see where a flip-flop for the time frame might work. We are talking about 11 buses total as far as the larger type 1s, and we're talking about 4 type 2 sped buses. So there's a lot to take into consideration there, but we can look at it and see what it would look like.
And I'm just gonna ask that the operational component, we will handle. I think the essence here is getting confirmation from the board that we're gonna move forward. We will engage the community, get their feedback, look at what are the possibilities in terms of the modifications that we can make in terms of the program. I think delaying this until Tuesday just provides less time for families to make arrangements. I think it would be important for us on Thursday to do a run of the old schedule to reacclimate the old and the new. Is the only day that we have in the month to really run these buses in the old start times. And we want to take advantage of that. We don't want to make that expense unless it's something that the board has already approved and voted on. It just doesn't make sense.
I mean, if I were a family at any other schools, I would expect that the start times would go back to what they were in 1920. So I would start making those preparations, whether we vote on that or not. If I were a family at Fox Run and Kendall, I would appreciate the consideration to see if that hour change could be mitigated a little bit.
On top of that, taking them into consideration, what keeps the other schools from saying the same?
But I think we can still vote and operationally, Alex can work it out.
I agree.
The other schools are changing about 5 minutes on average. So, I mean, they could say, I want to stay, but you know, they have less of an argument.
But within that time frame, they can still reach out to the Fox Run parents. They can still reach out to the parents at Kindle and be able to figure it out. I'm really glad that she was able to ask Joanne. I'm not very vocal. I don't talk just to hear myself talk, but I do what I need to do behind the scenes in the email. So when I sent the email, I thought she would be the best person because she's dealt with this on the behind the scenes and the principals have dealt with this, you know, operationally. They know the parents or whatever, but I think we can take the vote and trust that they will do what's right by Kendall and Fox Run operationally.
Okay.
That's what we did last time, according to Mike.
What's that?
That's according to you, that's what we did last time. We took the vote and trusted that we would do it, you know? So let's do it again.
Okay. So do I need to repeat the motion?
No. So yeah, if you don't mind repeating the motion.
So I'm proposing that we return to a 7:30 high school start time with the associated schedules for our middle schools and elementary schools. You know, realizing there might be adjustments there, Kendall and Fox Run as the administration can figure out. I also, as part of this motion, propose that we review and have full public hearings on the healthy start time or the 8:30 a.m. start time for our high schools with community input from all stakeholders before a decision is made.
And
thank you.
Can we add to that? I'm sorry, that we look long-term because we've got Jefferson coming up, we've got Columbus, perhaps
Ponus.
moving, we've got Ponus, we've got the new South Norwalk School. So can we look long-term and not just look myopically?
And I just want to say that a lot of the work that we've done in the past few weeks is like taking all of those factors into consideration, because I think they're essential in looking at the big picture. We can't just say right now it's costing us $500,000 when in reality it's going to cost us $1 million when we look at the full-blown picture of where the district is heading in the work ahead. The other thing that I want to point out to the board, and I don't want to belabor this, is also part of the conversation of looking at middle school choice and high school choice, which is a study that is ongoing right now and is something that will add value to the conversation as we move forward.
My motion stands, and if you have a vote.
Thank you for
second. I need a second.
Diana seconds. I'll second.
Okay, the motion is on the table. It's seconded by Sherelle and Diana. I just want to add one more thing before we call the vote. I make it simple. I just want to acknowledge, you know, that I think most of us were not on the board when this initial vote was taken. And I don't want to, anybody who was on the board and all the work that went into this initial thing, I really don't want it to seem as if we are trying to negate that, right? Clearly, we're acknowledging that there's more work to be done. We're hopefully we can build upon the work that was initially done. So much respect and gratitude to all the board members who initially worked on this and got us to this point. Okay.
Can I just clarify that the motion is to revert to the start times and bell times for 1920, but also to have public hearings about healthy start times? Is that what we're voting to do, both those things?
I believe public hearings and also traffic studies and also a holistic.
And looking long-term as well.
Yes, so yes, and Sarah.
That's a lot for one motion.
It's a big motion.
Go big.
Ready?
Are we all okay? Is there any further comment on the motion?
The only other thing that I would ask to clarify is that the option to revert to those start times wasn't necessarily one of the options that we were looking at for this evening. And I'm not saying that to be fractious. I just want to make sure that it wasn't like on that piece of paper that we looked at.
It was on the presentation that Sandra and Joanne made tonight, but no, it was not on the initial list of
And I
options.
think it was on wasn't that on the survey that you sent out to the kids this morning?
Yeah.
To the kids, okay.
Any further questions or comments on the motion on the floor? Seeing none, I will call for a vote. All in favor of the motion, please say aye or raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sarah? No? Okay. Any opposed? Any abstentions?
I'm going to abstain. I'm sorry. I just feel like I don't have enough information to make the choice this evening.
There's no need to apologize for your abstention. There are 3 abstentions, 5 in favor. The motion carries. Thank you, everyone, for a really, really good discussion. That said, I will entertain one last motion for the evening. Any motion to adjourn?
So moved.
And seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.